Let's do one more word with Patrick Martin, the Globe and Mail's Middle East correspondent, who's just back from some time in Lebanon. And let's start there. I want to find out, first of all, what the purpose of your trip to Lebanon was.
Well, it was really to eavesdrop on what's happening in Syria. I'm not one who's going to climb under the fence in a conflict that's quite as bloody as that one.
That gets you killed these days.
Well, it has gotten several journalists killed. So you monitor from there. And there's a number of people that are very good to talk to in Beirut. And it was also good to be in the north of the country near Tripoli and along the northern frontier, where every night the Syrians are bombing Lebanese villages in the north, because the Lebanese villages are believed to be helping the Free Syrian Army. And there is some admission that they're doing that. And the Lebanese government has its hands tied. What do we do about that? You know, if we act on them too quickly, well, our not masters, but the guys who are controlling a lot of the agenda in Lebanon, Hezbollah, are allied with Assad. So they don't want to come down too hard on them. On the other hand, you've got the Sunnis who are upset, and they don't want to lose the Sunni support, certain parties in the government either. So it's a real mess in Lebanon at the moment in those ways, and in Tripoli there's been fighting between different communities. So it was a useful window on Syria and a useful window on what the future of Lebanon might hold.
Let me come back to Lebanon, but stick with Syria for now. We have been hearing for weeks that the Assad regime is on its last legs. They can't hang out much longer. This is, you know, inevitably going to turn against him. He's still there.
Yeah, we've been hearing that about Assad, in fact, for more than weeks. We've been hearing it for more than a year. In fact, I remember going to the region. You know, I headed to Yemen right after Egypt, but I was keeping one eye on what was happening in Syria, because protests began on March the 15th there. And the early protests were crushed by the military, to which Assad offered an apology and fired the governor of the state in Daraa in the south. And it looked, he's going to handle things very differently there. Then things got out of hand and went from bad to worse. People at that time, back in April of last year, were saying, well, he can't hold on much longer. We saw what happened to Mubarak and so on. He is a much different thing. There, the military are very firmly in his grip. And they remain very firm, at least the elite forces remain very firmly in his grip. Mubarak did not have the control of the military. Once they saw him as a liability, they were willing to part company. That's not true in Syria. I think Assad can hold out for many more months. I think we're looking well into 2013 before he would be forced out of office. I think, yes, one day this regime will come to an end. And it may take fighting until next spring for that to happen. But I don't think it's going to happen quick. And I think that people would have benefited by a political solution a long time ago, but the Russians, who seem to have been the one party who might have pulled it off, have decided not to effect it. They seem to be catering more to Syria and Iran these days than I had expected.
You mentioned Iran, let's pick up on that. How important is the continued existence of the Assad regime, the Iranians?
Well, it would certainly be a black eye to Iran if they should lose their ally in Assad, but I think they've already discounted that. I think they're already looking beyond that. They will continue to have good relations with Hezbollah on the other side of Syria. They'll have to airlift things instead of trucking them across Syria when they want to arm them, perhaps, but they ship a lot of stuff to them already. So I think that they'll survive with Hezbollah. And don't forget, however, their increasing influence in Iraq, which is a much bigger hold, which is a much greater, richer state. I mean, Syria in some ways is a liability, whereas Iraq is a great asset, and their influence there is profound.
Okay, back to Lebanon. What did you see in Lebanon? You've been there before. What did you see this time that you thought, that's different?
It's going to sound silly, but speaking very personally, there's a development along the waterfront which is just gorgeous in downtown Beirut.
Not what I thought you were going to say.
And I'll tell you, I had the second best fish and chips I've ever had in my life there in that harbor. I was just floored. Went back there 3 times to eat. It was so good. I would meet people down there. They told me about this, and I couldn't believe it. So along the waterfront in Beirut, you've got this lovely little area. I was staying in the very inexpensive Ramada Hotel. And between the Ramada Hotel and this beach is the Four Seasons Hotel, which is like the most expensive place in town. Canadian owned, as you know, and so that Canadian run as well. They are the beneficiaries of this prime waterfront area. But no, the city of Beirut has developed beautifully, and I have to say that was more than I anticipated. I'd seen some of it grow, but this time it really did strike home that they have made a massive development in that country. That civil war, which tore them apart, they have, in terms of infrastructure, recovered completely, I would say. What we are seeing is some tensions with the government, but it's not life-threatening. We're seeing some tensions with Syria in the north, again, not life-threatening. So I saw, you know, the Pope is in Lebanon today. This is just a sign, too, of the times. This is a country that, in its own perverse way, is getting things together. And I urge everybody to go on vacation there. I'll tell you, it's wonderful.
They used to call it the Paris in the Middle East.
Well,
does it look that way now?
It looks better than it did that I've ever seen. I wasn't there before the Civil War. It began in '75. and those are the periods that they refer to it that way. That was in part because of the dominance of the French language and the Christian community there. And yeah, it was lovely, it was charming. The Christian community is now not as large a proportion of the population as it once was. It's changed in some degree. You don't hear French spoken nearly as much as you once did, although in Christian communities you'll still say merci when you finish instead of shukran. But you have in most of the city now, in the worst areas that were of destruction, a wonderfully rebuilt center. And it's actually a treat to walk around that city. I just love it.
The Civil War, of course, was a horrifying chapter in Lebanese history, and I wonder whether you talk to any people who fear that all of the new tensions in the region could somehow bubble over into Lebanon as well.
Absolutely, and particularly the Syrian situation. That's what they're very, very alarmed by. They don't want to see anybody taking sides. They're worried that Hezbollah might decide to take it into itself, to join that fray and to import the fighting into the country. I think the biggest importation is just going to be the shelling that we're seeing in the north. Those villages are evacuated at night. They hit the shells, the villages, nobody's hurt. But they do fear that some unknown factor could play into all of this because they've seen it before. It's been since 1990 that war was fought, so there are still a lot of people in that country who didn't know it firsthand. But it's only been a few years since the destruction has finally been cleaned up, so it's still fresh in a lot of people's minds what can happen when people decide to fight like that.
And I want to ask you one more thing about that, because you and I saw each other in Israel less than a year ago, and I remember going up to that northern border with Israel and Lebanon, and
You were in occupied Syria.
I was. Yeah. And are you talking about the Golan Heights?
The Golan Heights, occupied Syria. Some call it Israel, but it's the occupied Syria, as we know.
We're going to...
The Canadian government and international law, that's how they...
That's true.
I don't care who
We'll
wins.
table that discussion for today. But one of the things that one of the people I was up there with said, you see that area right there, looking over the hills, he was pointing at? He said, that's where the next war between Lebanon and Israel is going to take place. I don't know when it's going to be, but it's going to be there, and it won't be long from now. What do you think of that?
I don't think that's the case at all. I think that Israel's great interest in the region is in stability. They don't want to provoke something up there. The only reason that they would get engaged in things would not be to deal with Syria, but rather to deal with Hezbollah, should Hezbollah launch an action. That might be what this fellow had in mind, that they're going to come through the corridors along the northern Golan Heights area, through the border there. I don't see that happening either, because it's in Hezbollah's long-term interest to have stability too. Now, I think Hezbollah is a fixture that people better get used to, and I think Israel realizes that, and they just want calm. They're not sure whether they prefer Assad in power or the opposition. If I had to bet, I'd say they would go with Assad, because he's the John McCain of Syria, and the other guys, they're just not sure what's going to happen if they ever came into office. The Islamist force in Syria is profound and extreme, and they're bringing in outside jihadists to help them, and we have no idea whether those guys are going to leave when the fighting is over. If Assad should leave a vacuum, they'll swarm Damascus immediately, and we'll see what happens. But we might be seeing a Libyan kind of situation there.
Note to self, Patrick still does not recognize 30-year annexation of Golan Heights by the Israeli government. Okay, I got it. Thanks a lot for your time.
Good to see you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.